Hello and blessings once again. So we have spoken about metaphysical maintenance recently, we've elaborated on it, and now I would like to move on to journals and journaling, and most specifically paper. It's very important, and I am going to touch a little bit on ink as well. So when it comes to the wonderful world of journaling and the wonderful world of journals, what you are faced with are many, many beautiful options. How exciting. But what I would like to say to you is that when it comes to your magical journaling, it is less about the aesthetic and more about the quality of paper. So what do I mean by this? When it comes to magical journaling, there is so much that actively goes in it, actually and actively, both words, that goes into it. Now, it is not uncommon for a witch's journal, my own personal journals, to contain things like blood, oil, paint, botanicals, anything that really is relevant to the story, to the ritual that I might be writing about, to the spell that I might be creating, anything that is relevant to the story, to the narrative, right? And so my paper needs to be robust. Robust paper. So important. Now, one of the things that I have enjoyed working with over a period of time now is mixed media paper. Mixed media paper, like is found in, say, the Strathmore mixed media journals, they are robust. They actually feel a little bit like watercolor paper, so the papers are really thin, or the pages and the paper itself is really thick, not thin. And they're wonderful, and they'll hold many different types of mediums, from adhesive mediums to like matte medium, for instance, which is like gluggy, and it's a medium, a sticking, gluing type of medium, to watercolor, which does not seep through, to acrylic paints, to stamps, to inks, all manner of stuff. It can actually hold all of that, but it is a very thick paper. And so when you get a book that is made up of that type of mixed media paper, good quality mixed media paper that's very kindred to watercolor paper, you end up with a relatively thick book with quite a few less pages. And then you have the opposite of that. You have the Tomoe River paper, and I'm mentioning two papers that are very near and dear to my heart. Now, the Tomoe River paper is wafer thin. You can find the Tomoe in Hobonichi journals, Hobonichi Tesho journals, for instance, which is one of my lovely magical journals. It is wafer thin. It's wafer thin. It's a calligraphy paper, so it's made for withstanding fountain pen. It is so thin. You can hit it with watercolor and it does not bleed through. You can put beautiful types of inks on it and it does not bleed through. It may ruckle a bit, which gives it a little crunchy sound, which I personally love. I think it's a charm of the actual paper itself, but it doesn't bleed through. Very few mediums actually get through that paper, and blood is one that probably will. Actually, depends on how much you put on there. But these are the things that are important to think about, is what kind of paper is going to be able to stand the test of time. Because when it comes to paper, it's about longevity. It's about how robust that paper is, what you can do with it, and then the longevity of that paper. All well and good if you find a nice paper that's quite thick, but you throw a whole bunch of different mediums on top of it, you glue things to it, you put a little drop of blood here or a dash of oil there, or whatever it is that you choose to do with it. You do that, and over time that paper may break down, deteriorate slowly, and fade, and or promote fading, more to the point, because it's not necessarily the paper that fades, it's more the ink that you put on that paper. Which now brings me to pens. So a good pen is worth its weight in gold, and in order to not be wasteful, I highly recommend, not remember, but I highly recommend fountain pens, and there's a reason for that. Fountain pens are refillable, and you can use cartridges, ink cartridges, that are reusable in order to get your new ink in there, so there's no waste. The nibs are stainless steel. You can choose well, you can choose any thickness and thinness depending on what you personally like, and then you have control over the ink that you use as well. And this is really beneficial too, because there are an entire line of magical inks. Perhaps you've heard of dragon's blood ink or dove's blood ink. These are magical inks designed to be used, spells, sigils, and other bits and bobs in your diary or in your magical creations as well. So pen is important, paper is important. So try and choose a paper that is going to stand the test of time, that's going to help you to get your notes out, to be creative, to give you the space and that beautiful surface in which to actively document your journey and to be quite creative on top of. Now, there are other ways that you can go about this as well, and you can get yourself a nice big thick journal with incredible paper in it and a notebook, and then make sure you scribble in your notebook, and then what is the most important, you transfer creatively then into your witch's diary, your book of shadows, if you'd like to call it that. But we're calling this a magical journal for your power thoughts, and you will have volumes of journals. Let me tell you this, when I moved country, I set fire to all of my journals. There were hundreds. I have magical journals, volumes upon volumes of them. And over time, I have accrued volumes upon volumes of journals, which I have then again set fire to most recently at the change of the new year. But I did that because I experience evolutions, and I retain what I need because I go back through my journals quite often, and I find that whatever stays with me then is with me permanently, and I can release everything else, and anything that's of genuine value is retained and shared, otherwise it goes. But it's not uncommon for me to end up with volumes upon volumes. At the moment I don't, because I've just moved and I've decluttered and I downsized on everything. So I have very few diaries at the moment, very few journals, and playing around with different journals has once again become very, very fun for me. So I really like the I like the Hobonichi. I use my Midori as a wallet, but I've got paper with me at all times, and I can get Tomo River inserts or signatures for my Midori Traveler's Notebook. I have the Leuchtturm, which I've mentioned recently. You can choose Clairefontaine, which is again another type of notebook with paper that is specifically made for fountain pens. There are many, many, many wonderful journals out there, but there are also the cult classics. Moleskine, Leuchtturm, and Hobonichi are among them, and they're among my favorites. I like the Leuchtturm and I like the Hobonichi. They've got two very, very different papers. As far as my art journals go, I prefer the Strathmore Mixed Media Journal, and that's basically where it starts and ends for me. So for me, it's very important to have good quality paper and to invest the time in having good quality paper. I'm also of the belief that if you buy something that is of excellent quality, you don't have to replace it all that often, or at all, in fact. And the more you do that, the more ecologically sustainable it is. So you're not creating a huge amount of waste for your witchcraft. You're actually doing the best thing for you. A good fountain pen can be an heirloom item that you pass on to your children, who can then be passed on to your grandchildren. A great fountain pen can actually stand the test of time. And good books can weather time just as much. If you have taken the time to really create a beautiful grimoire that you are very proud of, then never let that go. Don't ever set that on fire. Pass it down to those in your bloodline whom you think will benefit from that knowledge. Bind it, of course, but pass it down. And so these are history items. They're heirloom items in the making. Choosing the absolute best quality that you can obtain at that moment in time is really, really wise. And let me say this as well. It's not about how much money you spend. You do not have to spend oodles and oodles of dollars trying to get the best quality products, because believe it or not, good quality and hype brands are not synonymous one with the other. You can get something that is very, very good quality, but that is a relatively unknown brand or an undervalued brand, but something that is worth a whole lot more and has half as much quality might be at the very apex of that, you know, desire line, for instance. So it's really about just making sure that you research this type of stuff. Good paper, good pen. What kind of pen are you going to buy? I use a Lamy, and I would love to remember the type of Lamy that I use, but I just got it on sale, I think, and it was my first Lamy, and I'm pretty happy with it. And I use Robert Oster inks. They're not, they're water-soluble inks. And another thing to consider is the type of ink that you do choose to work with. If it is water-soluble, then the moment you hit it with anything like oil, spritz it with water or anything else, it's going to blur, it's going to fade, it's going to affect the ink. So archival inks are really, really good. The Pigma Micron, which comes in all different types of colors and also nib sizes, is really good, and it is archival quality, so it will stand the test of time. But you can also get specific inks for fountain pens that do exactly that sort of thing. Snake ink or something to that effect, I think, is a very, very good one, but don't quote me on that just yet. I am yet to find one that I personally love, but that's all right. I'll get there eventually. Right now I'm using Robert Oster, and I use it for journaling and things of that nature. So this is just something for you to consider, especially if you've never had an introduction to paper, to pens, to fountain pens, to journaling. These are sort of more technical aspects that are not often talked about, and especially when it comes to the context of witchcraft, because believe it or not, you might start with one journaling style, and that might just be pen and paper and just writing flat out notes. No doodles, no splashes of paint, nothing like that. But then you get inspired. Your style of journaling will immediately or ultimately change after a while. And you want to experiment with other things. You might want to experiment with watercolor. If that becomes the case, then I have to say that there are some beautiful watercolors out there. Daniel Smith watercolors, which I bang on about all the time, their Primatech watercolor range is made of ground minerals, crystals. You can actually get hematite watercolor, lapis watercolor, amethyst watercolor, and you have fragments and pieces of that within the watercolor itself. So to me, that is an extension of magic within paint, and they are the only types of watercolors that I personally choose to use, especially when I'm creating sigil work with color, or I'm trying to add a particular type of flavor to my magical journaling intentions, things of that nature in my spell work, and I want to put a splash of creativity and color, then I use my magical inks, and Daniel Smith watercolor to me are magical. So that's about it. I could keep going on and on about it, but I shan't. Just things to consider, things to look into for yourself. Don't be influenced completely by what I say, excuse me, but make sure that you go out there and have a look at this information for yourself. See what is available to you in whichever country you live in whichever area you live in, and go with that. I personally love to be able to stroll into a shop and feel things with my hand. Once I know what I like, I'm then more than happy to order it online, but I have to make that first point of contact in person. That's just a quirk of my personality. Of course, that's not something that I can always do because of the nature of things these days. They're sometimes impossible to get within your region. So I chance it, but if I can help it, I like to make first point of contact and try things out. And in art shops, you can try out paper, and you can try out pens, and you can try out inks. They usually have little testers there for you in the same way that they do in makeup shops and things of that nature. So make the most of your resources as they are available around you. And if you need any help, please do reach out. This community is full of journal lovers, and I will tell you that everybody's got a little wisdom to share on this subject, and their favorites are their favorites for a reason. Tried and tested, tried and true, and ask around if you get stuck making your choices. You've heard what I've had to say, and if you have any further questions, put it to the community in the community Facebook page. See ya!